Good morning mga katribo. Welcome to another episode of Straight Talk. We're now live with the Executive Director and Vice Chair of the Climate Change Commission, Secretary Robert Borje. Good morning.
Good morning, magandang umaga Gigie at magandang umaga sa ating mga katribo. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And I hope everybody in their best today after our encounter with the super typhoon.
Yeah.
I hope everybody is well and everybody is doing their part.
I suppose so because it's already a sunny day today. So can we start off, Secretary? Okay.
Yes, Gigie.
Yeah, we have been hearing so much about climate change, and there's a commission, the Climate Change Commission, that is mandated to, to oversee and implement measures. Now, can you give us a background of what the Climate Change Commission is?
Thank you very much. The Climate Change Commission was created by virtue of RA 9729 and amended by RA 10174. So the Climate Change Commission is the lead government agency in charge of policy coordination and formulation on all issues regarding climate change. It's a very big responsibility. It's a very big mandate because the law recognizes that climate change is not a sectoral issue. It's not an agency issue. It's a multi-government, a multi-agency issue. And in fact, ang sabi namin sa climate change, the solutions to climate change require a whole of society, a whole of government, in fact, a whole of world approach in order to effectively address that. So, ang Climate Change Commission ay nangunguna sa pag-coordinate ng ating mga ahensya ukol sa mga polisiya to address climate change and also to provide recommendations on what to do. So it's many things, including also negotiations at the international level when it comes to climate change. Nangunguna din ang ating Climate Change Commission when it comes to monitoring and evaluation dahil base sa ating mga international commitments, may mga dapat tayong ginagawa para ipakita sa mundo yung level of commitment, understanding, and implementation natin ng ating mga international commitments. So it's a huge mandate, pero I would like to say that it's also a responsibility that we take on because we know that the government is behind us, our people are behind us. And of course, when it comes to international stakeholders, they're also behind us sa ating gusto na ang climate change ay ma-address at ang Pilipinas ay becomes a climate smart and climate resilient economy.
So we often hear the word climate change. So hindi lahat nakakaintindi kung ano ba yung climate change, or yung iba, very little do they know about climate change. Can you familiarize our viewers? Ano ba ang climate change? In the most simplest term, in the most simplest definition.
We have to come to an understanding. Of course, it's a scientific definition. So, to make it a little bit simpler, climate change o pagbabago ng klima brought about by the changes in the composition of our atmosphere, brought about also by human activities. While may change naman sa temperature that's natural, itong tinutukoy ito is over and above the natural threshold. So, nangyayari dito is because of human behavior. Nagkakaroon ng greenhouse gases. Pagkatapos dahil sa greenhouse gases, dahil natatrap yung sunlight na dapat sana may release, so umiinit lalo ang mundo. Pag umiinit ang mundo, ang nangyayari is nagkakaroon ng pagbabago sa ating klima. So nakikita mo ngayon, nakikita natin, hindi na siya as defined as before. Yung summer, may mga episodes ng rainy season. Sa ibang bansa, nagkaka-heatwave ng mas matagal, nagkakaroon ng kung ano-anong pagbabago sa klima. And then, it's simply put, ito yung pagbabago ng klima na we have to address because it really impacts the lives and livelihood of our people. In practical terms, ang ating development and growth as people, our survival as a people, are affected because of climate change. And we have to understand also that climate change is not just a one-time thing. It's sinasabi nga ng mga experts natin, it's cumulative. Over the past centuries, human behavior, things are coming to a head because yung mga polisiya natin before, yung industrial revolution, yung paggamit ng coal, all of that, simula nung panahon na yon, it led us up to here, to this tipping point ng ating history. So, kailangan talaga na i-address natin ito at kailangan malaman ng mga tao. And this is one thing that we want at Climate Change Commission for people to know, na climate change is a serious issue. It's an issue that's happening now and we're all affected by it. And kinakailangan, aksyonan na siya. And the recent typhoon just goes to show how worrying climate change is and how it really impacts people in real terms. Diba? Ang nangyari before, it's a weather disruption event. Pero ang nangyari I think from a category 2 or category 3, biglang naging category 5. Over 24 hours, and that's very, very disconcerting and very, very serious. Because that time frame of 24 hours may not be enough for people to come up with adaptive measures to prepare. And kaya nga sinasabi natin, ang climate change is an issue of buhay at kabuhayan, lives and livelihood are at stake. Ultimately, the survival of nations and development and growth for nations like the Philippines that aspire to be more prosperous.
Yeah. So, totoo yan because, the typhoon, the super typhoon Carding was, in just 24 hours, tama ka, Secretary, that we were given a very little time to prepare.
Ang mabuti nga is we were prepared. I understand that there were preemptive evacuations. And then, of course, government already has its own SOPs para masiguro na matugunan ang mga pangangailangan. But sabi nga ni Pangulong Marcos, we need to prepare more. And when you say preparations, it's not just human resources, it's not just time, it's also material resources. And for a country like the Philippines na gusto nating umangat sa ating estado, we want to be a developed country. That means when you take something from, when you have something, you have to take from your budget somewhere, diba? And you have to utilize that. So we really have to do our part, and it's not just a national issue, it's a global issue. Like what President Marcos clearly said, it's an issue that needs to be addressed because countries like the Philippines, who are least responsible for climate change, dahil ang contributions naman natin sa greenhouse gas emissions mas mababa, kailangan ang developed countries and carbon majors should be doing their part. And that's also what we're doing sa climate change.
Climate change din ba yung in the previous years, pag nagkakaroon tayo ng mga typhoon, medyo naglalast siya for like days before, the typhoon leaves. Parang ito kasi, in one day, there was an announcement, and then people were expecting that the following day, tas medyo umaaraw na. So is it still climate change?
What we can say is that our weather is continuously evolving, and there are climate change drivers that make things happen. And what we want for people to know is that it's not just quick onset events like typhoons. It's also slow onset events like, for example, ang drought na nangyari sa northern Asia, for example, in China. The rivers are drying up. That's attributed to climate change. Sa atin naman, it's typhoons. In other countries, it's floods. In the northern hemisphere, it's the melting hemisphere, it's the melting of the glaciers. So all of that konektado. What we want to say, it's a system issue. If that can be better appreciated, magkakabit-kabit siya. Kung kaya't kailangan din ng kabit-kabit at coordinated approach ng gobyerno, ng society at ng mundo para ma-address siya. So it's really, it's not the hard questions to be asked would tell us that it's a compounding issue, complex issue. Ibig sabihin, nagdadagdag siya through the years. Kaya kailangan talaga natin to take a few steps back and to see ano bang kailangan natin gawin as a community, as an individual, as a barangay, as a country, and as a world para matugunan na ito. Dahil it really has to be addressed.
Yeah. So, now that medyo, you know, yung mga sunod-sunod na nangyayaring mga, you know, the typhoon, tapos yung sabi mo nga, Secretary, you know, the melting of glaciers, bushfire is also attributed to climate change, right? So, being the Vice Chair and Executive Director of the Commission, how challenging is it to make it understandable to Filipinos the effects of climate change and practical ways
Thank you very much,
to address it?
Gigi. Kami sa Climate Change Commission, we'd rather think of it not as a challenge but as a responsibility. Buhay naman ay nagbibigay ng iba't ibang hamon sa atin. And it's up to us, it's up to people, it's up to organizations to rise to the challenge and to address that. Kasama po sa priorities ng ating Climate Change Commission to make climate change more understandable to people, to make people, how we say it, to make the important interesting, and then to make the interesting something that we can act on urgently. I have a communications and diplomacy background, so importante yung if we want behavioral changes, we have to come up with effective communication strategies. Hindi naman natin mababago ang ating mga polisiya kung kinakailangan or ma-reinforce ang polisiya kung hindi naintindihan ng ating mga leaders, ng mga pinuno, kung hindi maintindihan ng ating mga lokal na pamahalaan, kung hindi naintindihan ng ating mga citizens kung ano yung problema. Ang maganda lang ngayon, I think, is that with President Bongbong Marcos, he has been very, very clear at the outset on the importance of addressing climate change and his commitment to work not just with the government stakeholders and stakeholders of the nation, but in the international community to address it. So that's one of our priorities. But of course, we also have other priorities, several-pronged siya. We want to assist our LGUs to make sure that they're able to come up with their own climate adaptation plans and that there are support for that. Pagkatapos, gusto din natin na ang ating mga supporting mechanisms, including the People's Survival Fund, are made even more available to LGUs para may karampatang budget para sa mga nangangailangang LGUs. Of course, importante din dyan is to strengthen our partnerships not just within the Philippine government but also with other sectors, including higher educational institutions and state universities and colleges. And of course, our partners in media, because I was a former media personnel as well, and iba pag yung araw-araw na pag-uusapan siya, and maybe perhaps well, the Department of Education has already integrated climate change, no? But reinforcing kasi yung other types of communication venues para mas lubos na maintindihan ng mga tao. So it's a multi-pronged approach for us in the Climate Change Commission now, and we want also to ensure that our government agencies, including the Climate Change Commission, are capacitated. It's an ongoing thing dahil nagbabago ang siyensya. Ang gusto natin is mapaigting ang coordination with our government agencies to make sure that those with their respective mandates continue to improve. Pagkatapos ang Climate Change Commission, ganun din. At nang sa ganun ay we work very closely together to really make sure that our strategy and our vision for a climate resilient and smart Philippines is achieved.
Yeah. So it seems that, it's really, the government will be very firm in, implementing measures towards addressing the climate change. And very evident because the President even mentioned that in his first SONA and during his speech at the United Nations General Assembly. So we have more to talk about, Secretary, but before we, kung anong mga topics about climate change, very important, essential topics, let's take a short break.
Be updated sa news and happenings katribu. Hatid ng Daily Tribune sa inyo ang mga balitang napapanahon sa loob at labas ng bansa. Kami na ang bahala sa paghahatid sa inyo ng mga latest and reliable news. We got you covered sa programang Tribune News on Q. Mapapanood mula umaga hanggang gabi, Lunes hanggang Biyernes sa Daily Tribune Facebook page at Tribune Now on YouTube. Mga impormasyong direktang makukuha mula sa sources at diretsahang usapan. Yan ang ating damin sa inyo sa programang Straight Talk. Samahan nyo kami sa makabuluhang talakayan live tuwing Martes alas 10 ng umaga sa official Facebook page ng Daily Tribune at Tribune Now on YouTube. Fun and inspiring na kwentuhan? Sagot na yan ang programang Spotlight ng Daily Tribune. Makipagkwentuhan at kilalanin ng iba't ibang personalidad na kilala sa kani-kanilang larangan. Manood at makinig sa mga inspiring stories na kanilang ibabahagi kasama si Nina Ventura. Be ready ng mamangha at matuwa every Thursday alas 2 ng hapon dito lang sa Daily Tribune Facebook page at Tribune Now on YouTube.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. We're still with Secretary Borje. And before we took a break, we were talking about the multifaceted climate change topic, and the different approaches to addressing climate change. So, medyo na-introduce mo na kami what climate change is, although, talking about it would really, 1 hour is not enough, but at least, our viewers would understand what climate change is. So ano ba? What are the current priorities and initiatives of the Commission?
Thank you very much. I would love for another interview to expound on the approach. Well, we did discuss climate change earlier. Siguro ngayon ang importante sa priorities ng Climate Change Commission is number one, with the new cohort of commissioners, we've resolved to be a working Climate Change Commission. And that entails strengthening our partnerships with all our stakeholders, from the national government agencies to our experts, to our youth, to our media partners. Just to raise the level of awareness and understanding about climate change. But importante ang to build the capacities of our LGUs, because that's where things happen and that's where action needs to be done. So ang local climate change adaptation plan natin ginagawa ng ating Climate Change Commission, and we're working with the Department of Interior and Local Government, especially now because we just got off from a election cycle. So the new leaders have to know have to know about climate change and what they need to do, because climate change adaptation plans are required na gusto natin mapataas ang submission ng LCCAP. In the same manner, we have to also strengthen our partnership with government agencies, because there are different mandates. But again, as I said earlier, climate change is a whole of government approach. It's a cross-cutting governance issue. So what we want is na-identify kasi ang budget within each government institution, and we've successfully increased that. Right now, it's now 400, uh, around 420 billion already in the National Expenditure Program, yung na-allocate ng ating NGIs or National Government Institutions for climate change. So these are the expenditure tagging. Nakikita na nag-increase na siya by more than 40%. Gusto natin na magamit ito to increase the resiliency not just of the agencies but of their programs as well. Importante din ang ating partnerships with strengthening the National Panel of Technical Experts at maging available sila, especially for local government units that do not have the capacity to undertake projects. And importante dito, when it comes to this, ang People Survival Fund, it's a 1 billion peso fund that's available for LGUs to bolster their funding para sa climate change adaptation programs. Right now, the utility rate is about 35-36%, and we want to increase it, and we want na magamit yung fund na yun very quickly for their adaptation projects. And it all boils down really to LGUs. So yun yung focus natin, and we're strengthening our mechanisms right now, our coordination with government agencies, particularly with those that are preventive in nature. So we're working very closely with the Department of Energy, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of course, DILG and the Department of Education for information and education campaign. And right now, sinabi ni President Marcos na importante ang climate justice. And this is what we are doing at the Climate Change Commission. We're involved in a series of discussions with international stakeholders on how to further bolster the climate justice agenda through unlocking climate finance in the multilateral arena, and to make it responsive to the needs of people, especially when it comes to loss and damages. So again, it's a multi-pronged approach. Pwede kang malula, or you can embrace it and make sure that our country is fully enabled to respond to these challenges.
Okay. So very, para sa viewers natin, parang climate change, the word climate change is parang very intellectual. I mean, talking about it is parang very intellectual. So, paano natin, what are the practical ways? At this point, what are the practical ways, since this is, a whole of government, it's a whole of nation, everybody should be involved in, climate change. For the ordinary Filipinos, what do you think, Secretary, are the practical ways for them to help address it?
Again, a whole of society approach siya. Balikan ko lang yung idea na hindi ko nabanggit kanina. Isa din sa priority ng Climate Change Commission is to draw in our private sector. Climate change mitigation kasi and adaptation efforts require a lot of investments. And of course, our government is investing in ourselves. Nakikita na natin yung uptrend sa budget. Pero government cannot do it alone. So we need to work with our private sector to invest in, for example, sa energy sector natin, to move from coal-based power plant to a cleaner energy. Pero it requires a lot. It requires billions, if not trillions of pesos. So our private sector needs to be involved. Our youth need to be involved. Our CSOs need to be involved. We're formalized already the mechanism for consultations with the CSOs under this cohort of leaders, commissioners at the Climate Change Commission, and also with the private sector para mag-usap at magkaroon ng espasyo para malaman kung ano ang priorities. And para sa amin, kailangan na napag-usapan ito, and people have to ask the hard questions para makita kung ano talaga ang solusyon na kinakailangan. Now, going from the macro, from the global to the national, to the local, to the individual. Of course, importante ang individual responsibility. We have to know the issue. More than that, we have to know what we can contribute. Ang sinasabi nga natin is no responsibility is too big and no task is too small. So lahat po ng kailangan that we can do, we should do. Pero we would always remind people na if we should aspire for something greater. Kasi hindi naman pwede na minimum palagi. Now is really the time for governments, for national agencies, for CSOs, for LGUs, and for individuals to aspire to contribute more. Now, how do we do that? Change in our behavior. For example, simply put, we have to address the issue of the culture of waste. Kailangan masinop tayo at hindi tayo waldas at maaksaya. Kailangan alam natin na inaalagaan natin ang ating environment dahil pag hindi natin ito inaalagaan, ay hindi din tayo aalagaan ito. For example, Sierra Madre. We need to protect our forests and our mountain ranges because they're there for a certain reason. Plastic, alam natin na in the production of plastics alone, may greenhouse gas emission siya. Now, nakita ngayon sa latest typhoon Karding, yung dami ng ating garbage, diba? That's an indication of our profligate and wasteful human behavior. Sabi ko nga, when we were at the International Coastal Cleanup Day, maganda na we get together to clean up our coasts. But maybe the more important question is, why do we have to clean up when we can clean in the first place?
Yeah.
So this, again, is the basis why the Climate Change Commission has advanced the principle of build right at first sight. Kung mapapansin ninyo, right now the buzzword is build back better or build forward better. And this is with regard to disaster risk management. But we say, because our resources are limited, we're unlike other countries, we should build right. Antemano, dapat maayos na siya. So dapat yung mga nasa no-build zones, dapat walang community sa no-build zones because that should be an area where we can build we can grow mangrove forests. Yung mga mountain ranges natin, yung mga forests natin, dapat antemano, pinapaigting natin ang pag-secure sa kanila. Pagkatapos sa solid waste management, tayo dapat, hindi naman tayo tapon ng tapon lang. Tapos, kasama din dito, wag maaksaya sa paggamit ng energy because you know every megawatt that's wasted it also goes up to our atmosphere. So we have to be very, very conscious of what we can do. If we can walk, bicycle, yun nga yung magandang development ngayon. If you can walk, take a bike, maganda siya. But again, it becomes a whole of government issue and whole of society problem because people will say, you want us to do this, pero anong options meron tayo?
Yeah.
Diba? You want us to use the mass transportation, but anong available services that's there right now? Ang maganda lang, again, is that under this administration, under President Marcos, all these are being addressed. It will require time. So in the meantime, while we work on fundamental changes, we have to be willing to do our part to contribute to the adaptation mitigation of climate change and its impacts.
Siguro, you were mentioning secretary. The secretary was mentioning a while ago yung mga basura. I mean, right after nag-subside yung floods, after the typhoon, doon nakita talagang sobra. The whole street talagang puro basura. So, dito rin pumapasok. Sobrang dami.
Makita mo isang plastic lang yan. Ilan tayo sa Metro Manila? Estimate is around 11 million. If everybody throws away just a tiny piece of plastic.
And each would be doing that.
Correct.
So it's really tons of garbage.
Kaya I always say this no sa mga talks ko. We hold governments to account also. Namamagnify kasi siya. Pagtapos ibalik natin sa ating buhay, nakikita din natin na ay contributor pala ako. We cannot not do our part. We have to demand from government. Our government is fully committed to this. I've never, President Marcos has been very clear, and in all of his major policy statements, from his inauguration to the SONA, to UNGA, which is the biggest and highest platform of engagement with the entire world. Klarong-klaro what needs to be done and what the priorities are. Maybe we have to look into ourselves also what we can contribute. And when we do, when all sectors work together and the entire world work very closely together urgently, then we will be able to achieve climate justice.
Is the climate change, wanting to look into, the use of plastics? Kasi, the bottled water is very convenient, nandiyan lang siya, readily available. You're thirsty, and then, if there's no potable water there, drinking water, then you go to the store and buy. So, very available. And then in the groceries, meron tayong mga plastics. And then I remember years back, we have this, may mga ordinance na pinasa ang mga LGU. Some really banned, the use of plastics. Tapos biglang merong bumalik na yung plastics, and then they say that these are recyclable plastics that are, biodegradable. And then merong mga groceries that, you have to bring your own eco bag, and meron ding mga supot, mga papel. So, is the Climate Change Commission wanting to look into that, the implementation of, the no use of plastics across the country?
Thank you. It's an important question that needs to be asked. And for the Climate Change Commission, we've been deeply involved in the creation of the Extended Producers Responsibility Law, which has now turned into a law, and we make responsible the producers of plastics, and to make sure that their use, and they're responsible for the management, not just the production. Kasama din dito siguro to make sure that we have our laws, for example, on solid waste management, that these will be implemented even more strongly. We're encouraged by the fact that many LGUs have chosen to come up with ordinances to address this. But again, it has to be coordinated, and it has to be at the national level also. We just have to sound the alarm, no? Na plastic is not just plastic. It's not just contributory to floods. It's contributory to pollution of our water resources, whether rivers or the oceans and the seas. And then it's also going to affect our food security. And right now, one of the issues na nakikita ng ating mga experts, yung mga microplastics are creeping into our food system because they're being ingested by fish. So we really need a lot to work on.
So much to do.
I would just want to say na wag tayong it kind of boggles the mind, the enormity of the responsibility. But we have to sit down and see what we can do. There should be better options for Filipinos, but it has to be a conscious decision on their part that they forswear yung use ng plastics. But government has to also come up with more either incentives for companies and individuals siguro. And then also, if the incentives don't work, you have penalties.
I was supposed to ask
to
that.
make sure that those responsible, especially the producers, will do their part in making sure that plastic is produced much better and disposed of in a more environmentally friendly manner.
Do we have specific laws that, penalizes or, sanctions?
Well, we have
If we have environmental laws, very broad kasi pag sinabi mong environmental laws, pero pag Climate Change Commission, violators nung, do we have specific laws?
We have the Solid Waste Management Act, which holds those responsible. And then we also have the EPR. But do we want stronger laws?
Yes.
That will be up to our legislature. How they're going to come up with penalties for this. And maybe, yun nga, we have to draw all of our partners together, not just the executive, but also the legislative, to come up with the law agenda that's really supportive. Kasi marami na nga tayong batas, baka kailangan
Amend lang.
consolidate
Yeah,
siya,
consolidate.
find out whether amendments are required, and this is why actually we've come up with the EPR para to move the society to pivot it towards more responsible behavior. And again, it's behavior that's not just lodged in one particular sector, buong bansa talaga siya. If we want to incentivize, for example, the procurement of products that are environmentally friendly, then we can also do that. I think it's something that's being worked on right now. We also want to incentivize investments in green energy that will provide green jobs, and our Department of Finance has been working on establishing that enabling environment for our investors to move towards that. So it takes a lot, but we're getting there. Ang tanong ngayon is, will we get there fast enough?
Yeah, I was supposed to ask that.
Because urgency siya. Sabi nga ni President Marcos, the time to act is now. Hindi ba? But we have to really, sa akin we have to think of what we can do as individuals and as sectors and as a whole of society, a whole of nation, to make sure that the challenges are addressed.
If you're going to rate on a scale of 1 to 5, anong rating mo sa awareness ng tao? I mean, based on, you going around, so how do you rate it? With 5 as the highest, of course.
I don't want to do this without benefit of a scientific,
Base lang. I mean, it's not going to be a...
It's actually one of our pinag-uusapan namin ngayon, yung to come up with the strategic communications and to have that survey para yung level of understanding mas totoo. But it requires funding, and we're looking for funding right now with our partners. But I would not want to give the number, but maybe ganito. I have friends who are lawyers, who are doctors, may mga professionals din, tapos syempre may mga kaibigan tayo sa iba't ibang estado ng buhay. When you talk about Climate Change Commission, kadalasan sinasabi, may Climate Change Commission pala.
Alright.
Okay, so maybe on that part, medyo a little bit low, but climate change is there. Alam ng tao na may climate change, but siguro yung level of awareness and understanding needs to be identified. Kasi it's usually correlated with, kinukonekta rather, sa disaster risk reduction. But what we say nga is climate change is more than just disaster, more than disaster preparedness, more than disaster action. It's more preventive, and it's greater in scale, more preventive nga siya. So in that regard, siguro we need to work very, very hard, and we need partners like you in the media. We need partners in like DILG and Department of Education, and other stakeholders such as the CSOs, to get people to understand it even more, and more than understanding, really to act on it. And I think isa sa importanteng action points would be tree planting and tree growing. And I don't think it's not a coincidence that President Marcos, during his birthday, chose to have that activity, because it addresses the need for mitigation, climate change mitigation, and in some ways also co-benefits ng adaptation. Kasi talaga as a carbon sink, importante ang role ng ating mga forests. Apart from the oceans, the forests play a crucial role, and nakikita natin yan not just for greenhouse gases, for carbon sinks, but also itong ating Sierra Madre, we need to protect the forest there because it really acts as a barrier and nadidiffuse niya yung impact ng typhoon.
Yeah.
And
I saw that map.
yes.
You know, di ba yung hardly hit was, you know, so far was, you know, the Luzon. But then looking at the map, ang haba ng Sierra Mountain range.
Nine provinces yan
Yeah.
eh. So importante, ang sinasabi nga, we have resources that we need to protect because they also protect us. And President Marcos has taken an important first step in that tree planting and tree growing activity. And we've been talking with our foresters. Ang sabi nga nila, the figures now is if one person, a Filipino, planted 100 trees, then pwede na siyang makonsider na carbon neutral. Ibig sabihin, you've helped in mitigating yung greenhouse, yung carbon footprint mo neutral na siya. So that's something that we can do, something that we can work with our LGUs, with our national government agencies. Meron naman ng greening program right now, but scaling up and intensifying it would be a good way to do it. Letting our youth know, of course, of their responsibility in getting them involved in something, in tree planting and growing would be important. Kami nga, when I was young, Gigie, every summer, my parents would take me to the province. Tapos we would always plant. Every time we're there, magtatanim talaga kami.
Trees yun or plants? Anything?
Trees yun. Usually it's either calamansi or mangga or fruit trees kasi farm nga siya. And sinasabi ng grandparents ko na, you know, it's important to do this because it's your way of contributing. So hopefully that attitude of responsibility is further strengthened, and it's not just tree planting, it's really in our behavior. And to make the right choices for the environment, for our nation, and for ourselves.
Yes, totoo yan, Secretary. It's not just, you know, the government, you know, setting policies for us on climate change, but without the people cooperating or doing their part for pertaining to these policies is useless. I mean, if we all don't cooperate. So I'm going to ask Secretary, after we take this break, about how the Commission will move forward based on anchoring on the speech of the President in the United Nations General Assembly. So let's take a break and we'll be right back.
Be updated sa news and happenings katribu. Hatid ng Daily Tribune sa inyo ang mga balitang napapanahon sa loob at labas ng bansa. Kami na ang bahala sa paghahatid sa inyo ng mga latest and reliable news. We got you covered sa programang Tribune News on Q. Mapapanood mula umaga hanggang gabi, Lunes hanggang Biyernes sa Daily Tribune Facebook page at Tribune Now on YouTube. Magandang araw mga katribu! Narito na ang mga makakasama nyo tuwing umaga sa programang Gising Na. Roy Pelovelo, Comfy Manalo, Vernon Velasco, Kim Sancha at Chirk Balagtas. Abangan ang programang Gising Na sa Facebook page ng Daily Tribune.
Ilabas na ang mainit na kape at samahan kami sa inyong pag-almusal, mga katribo.
Sama-sama natin alamin ang mga natatagong istorya sa mga latest na kaganapan sa loob at labas ng bansa.
Maaari niyo rin ibahagi sa amin ang inyong opinion via Daily Tribune Facebook page at Tribune Now sa YouTube.
Makichika na rin sa latest showbiz happenings, mga katribo.
Kaya naman, magsama-sama po tayo sa
Gising na!
Mga impormasyong direktang makukuha mula sa sources at diretsahang usapan. Yan ang ating damin sa inyo sa programang Straight Talk. Samahan nyo kami sa makabuluhang talakayan live tuwing Martes alas 10 ng umaga sa official Facebook page ng Daily Tribune at Tribune Now on YouTube.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. And while on break, I was asking the Secretary kung Ano ba yung climate justice? So can you explain in brief ano po yung climate justice na yan?
Thank you. Lagyan natin ng konteksto, no? Kasi bunsod ito ng pronouncements ni President Marcos. Again, this was said during his inaugural address and SONA and sa UNGA. So climate justice basically means for those who are least responsible for climate change, for those with the least resources, for those who are most vulnerable and at risk, the entire world needs to do more. Conversely, it means that those who are responsible, those with the resources, they have to do more. Kasi nga, this is a compounding historical issue. At maganda ang sinabi ni President Marcos to hold to account the nations who have contributed to the situation where we are right now. Because what they've done affects everybody. And sabi ko nga kanina, lives and livelihoods are at stake. It's growth and development that are at stake. And it's holding back people from, ito ang sinasabi kasi sa UN, from achieving a life of dignity. Lugar na makakabuhay siya na, without fear and wanting to grow and flourish as an individual and as societies. So it's very, very fundamental, and it's something that needed to be articulated at that level and at that venue. And we are very encouraged by the leadership shown by President Marcos because he's a resonant and articulate voice on what it means. Ang sinabi nga niya is the Philippine government is doing its part to harness the collective experience and expertise of our stakeholders to bring it at that point. Ang sinabi niya, ang importante pa is to unlock climate finance. Kasi all of this requires a lot of investment, a lot of money, a lot of resources. And they have to move from the developed world and carbon majors to the developing world that suffers the most. In fact, we have our study that it's around $10 billion now for the last 10 years. Ang loss and damages ng
$10 billion?
Pilipinas. $10 billion. And that's, ang laki niyan. Yung loss and damages mo kasi, hindi naman part yan ng budget mo. But you have to take into consideration anong impact niyan. And these are just the structures. We want to make a study nga, yung number of days productivity, days, yung cost ng productivity na nawawala. Kada araw, every time there's a typhoon. Malaki ang impact nito. And sa atin, developing countries need that. Kailangan siya. May sinabi nga kami nun sa WIM, this was for the four series of typhoons before itong dalawa. It's about $1.6 billion. That's equivalent to about more than half of our budget for health insurance.
Oh,
Ang laki niya.
more than half.
Ang laki niya. Kung nagamit yan somewhere else for adaptation or mitigation, we would be in a much better place. But first, we seem to be caught in this vicious cycle. And this is why the head of state and the head of government needs to make that forceful statement, and which the President Marcos did. And kami naman sa Climate Change Commission, along with other government agencies, are working very, very hard to make sure that the agenda of loss and damages are worked on for the upcoming COP27. And we're also working with our civil society on making this an important part of the agenda. Kasi we cannot turn a blind eye to this. We cannot turn our faces away because it's the here and now, and we need to address this.
It's already there, right in our face.
That's right. So, yun nga, climate justice, ibalik natin sa buhay at kabuhayan. When people's livelihoods are imperiled, when their lives, when their properties are destroyed, when their lives are snuffed out, there has to be collective action, and we have to be moved to do more. It's really a challenge for us. Pero if we do not do anything about it, and this is what's good about the Philippines, is that we're providing an important voice in this debate that we say requires action. Kasi nag-agree na tayo na climate change is here and it needs to be addressed. So it's time for us for action. Ang sabi nga natin is the principle that we base our agreement on is climate justice, and the locus of action is climate finance. Unlock climate finance. Unlock it now.
Will this call to action, Secretary, be part of your participation in the United Nations COP?
It is. In fact, we have a series of meetings already, and we're in several consultations with the Group of 77. We've also attended subsidiary bodies meetings sa Bonn. And importanteng aspect siya, component siya ng ginagawa natin. And apart from that, of course, we know that it's something that's being discussed right now. The Climate Change Commission is, in the meantime, also working with our development partners to make sure that they also help us bilaterally, through bilateral partnership or partnerships with multilateral organizations to help us out. In fact, again, we formalized this mechanism. And we've identified several projects already, around 15 projects. But we want more, of course. And importante na for the coming COP27, loss and damages will be discussed. And nakikita natin ngayon that even for CSOs, they've been pushing to make sure that the developed countries and the carbon majors will finally act on the issue of loss and damages.
So that's very, I mean, I learned so much. I mean, I guess our viewers learned so much. Yun, yung sinabi mong damages. Hindi ko alam, ganun pala kalaki yung damages that the Philippines lost to, the effects of climate change. And we look forward to be a media partner with the Commission,
Thank you.
Secretary.
Thank you.
And marami pa sana akong itatanong but then I will save that for the future engagements of the Daily Tribune with the Commission. So thank you so much, Secretary Robert Borje. By the way, hindi alam po ng ating viewers, ang ating secretary po ay dati rin pong media person back in the days before he joined the government diplomacy, Department of Foreign Affairs, and ayun po hanggang ngayon ay nasa government pa rin po siya. Mukhang nasa puso na talaga niya yung public service. So thank you very much, Secretary, for being with us. It's an honor to have you here, and we look forward to more conversations about climate change.
Thank you very much, Gigie, and on behalf of the Climate Change Commission, and maybe on behalf of the Philippine government, maraming salamat sa Daily Tribune. We know that you have a page on sustainable development. I think it's important giving us that space for people to know and discuss development issues. And sa atin, it's not just a development issue, but it's an existential issue, climate change. So it's important that we strengthen this partnership and trust that the Climate Change Commission will continue to be a reliable partner. This is not a one-off interview, and we hope that there will be other interviews coming in the next weeks or next years, because kailangan talaga we have to kung compounding issue, dapat increasing naman yung efforts and actions natin. And to come up with effective actions, to come up with effective policies, it's always important the space for discussion is done. And that's the important role that media has to play. And we need to make the people more aware about the important issue of climate change. And kami naman po sa climate change, we're a small agency, but we're working very hard. We're trying to be as agile as we can to address the issues of climate change and to deliver on our mandate. And we ask for people to come together, to work together. Dahil at the end of the day po, kung buhay at kabuhayan ang at stake, lives and livelihood are at stake, and it's our development and growth as a country that's at stake, and in fact, it's the entire world, we have no other choice. And we have to do it, and we have to do it now.
Yeah, totoo yan, Secretary. So, how we cooperate in, addressing climate change, it's going to be a promise or a peril. Tama po. So again, thank you mga katribo for tuning in. Watch Straight Talk Live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Daily Tribune's Facebook page and Tribune Now on YouTube. Again, I'm Gigie Arcilla. Thank you very much, Secretary Robert Borje.
Salamat po, ma'am. Salamat po sa lahat.